Hi, Sarah. Thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Hi, thank you for contacting me.
Yes, yes. We are both Legionnaires, survivors, and
Yeah.
it is my understanding that, like mine, I contracted through water. Somehow, the water was contaminated, or the droplets of air got into my lungs. But your story is a little bit different because it involves a particular strain of Legionella relating to garden soil. Is that correct?
Yes,
Wow. Would you like
com-
to share your story with us?
absolutely. Um, in May of 2000, I lived in a suburb of Seattle, and working outdoors was my happy place. My husband and I had purchased several bags of compost and several bags of soil, garden soil, from a company out of Kent, which is a suburb of Seattle. I dropped it while I'm leaning over the already opened bag. And as I dropped it, I also inhaled. I never thought anything about it. I kept on working, and
Sure.
days later, I started gradually not feeling very good at all. Never thought anything about dirt, had no clue. On a Monday in May, I don't, it would have been around the 22nd, let's just say a Monday.
Yep.
My daughter took me to the ER at Virginia Mason in downtown Seattle. I sat there for 7 hours feeling so sick. I ended up going to the public restroom to just throw up. I felt so bad, but they were so busy. Eventually, in 7 hours or so, they did find a room for me, but they did not do they did nothing. They did no labs, no x-rays, nothing, and said, well, we can't find anything wrong with you. You just might as well go home. So I did. And Tuesday, I I felt so horrible. Um, I was just I could hurt. I was in bed. I was just writhing in discomfort. I don't even know how to explain it. By Wednesday morning, I was on my hands and knees. Just I was beside myself in pain and not feeling good, feeling weak. And my husband took me, and as soon as I walked into the door, they said, "Sit down right now. You're obviously not well." I was transported in a wheelchair to the X-ray,
Hmm.
and the lady who took the X-ray wheeled me back out into the hallway where the light board is, and she had put up the X-ray, and she was an X-ray tech, and she said, I'm not supposed to ever share the results of an X-ray, but you have every reason to feel as bad as you do. Your lungs are really bad.
Oh,
And then I'm taken back to the exam room, and my favorite doctor of all times said, check yourself into Virginia Mason as soon as possible. So we drove back home. I got some things to take to the hospital, checked in, and that night was just in a regular room where they would just check on me and check your blood pressure and all of that, the vitals. And I had to use the restroom, but my that evening, and my urine looked like coffee. I didn't know what that meant, but in the middle of the night, a nurse or a nurse's aide had come in to do vitals and let me know that I was not a patient that they could focus on. They didn't have, this was beyond their capabilities on that floor, and that in the early morning they would transport me to what they called critical care. It was like an ICU unit. So early morning, that's where I ended up. They tried and they started doing x-rays
hmm.
of my lungs. um, I just said, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I feel like I'm suffocating. And they tried me on a BiPAP machine. I said, I can't breathe. That I wanted to throw it off my, grab it off my face. So
Right.
they said, okay, I guess they must have had a little powwow discussion. And the doctor at the time for that shift came in and said, we're going to have to put you, we're going to have to sedate you, put you in a coma and put you on the ventilator, a ventilator. And all I said was, just please don't let me die. And she said, well, we won't. And that was Thursday evening, Thursday afternoon. I'm not sure when. And then the next thing I know is someone is asking me what day it is. And I had no clue. There was no calendar around. How could I know what day it is? I just woke up.
Right.
And it was all very confusing to me. I'd had weird little, funky visions or something, probably while coming out of the heavy anesthesia. But anyway, they took me to a regular room, and my husband said, "You almost died. I'm so glad you're here." And then over time, uh, learned all the story. And that first night, that Thursday night, my family was in the waiting room. My daughters, my stepson, and my husband. Apparently, things had gotten so desperate. My family didn't know this immediately. Was that at some point that evening, there was no pulse, no blood pressure, nothing. And the doctor, head of that shift, that unit, was just within a hair's width of declaring me dead when someone found or discerned a very, very slight pulse. So I don't know the steps of time there, other than they had called in the pulmonologist uh, and took him away from whatever he was doing late that night.
Mm-hmm.
They had given me some kind of drugs that paralyzed my legs and my arms so that my body would only need to support my vital organs. The pulmonologist spent 40 minutes uh, trying to adjust the ventilator because one lung had collapsed completely and my other lung had collapsed at 90%. So he came out into the waiting room and said, I have done all I can. I've adjusted the ventilator so high, I'm risking exploding her lungs.
Mm.
If I don't expect her to live beyond an hour, so you might want to go in and say goodbye. And I remained in a coma for 3 weeks. The hospital paid for my two daughters and my 2-year-old granddaughter to stay in a Virginia Mason owned lodging house, or a hotel, if you will, an inn across the street. And my husband went back home. The 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 days following that, respiratory therapists would come in and suction out my lungs. And my husband said it was a real thick, like nasal stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and brown and gross. And they would do that at least twice a day. The pulmonologist also had told my husband that I would probably have brain damage because of lack of oxygen. And uh, they continued to x-ray all through this from the moment I had been admitted, and x-raying more frequently than they would for a typical pneumonia patient.
Sure.
They still had no idea what had caused this infection in my lungs, and were had never, and admitted later, they had never encountered anything like this before. It moved so fast. It was so crazy. And because they didn't know what it was, they had given me quadruple doses of 4 different antibiotics intravenously. My daughter said I had uh, tubes coming out of multiple places in veins, and even between my toes at some point. So also those first several nights in ICU, one of the nurses had kind of campaigned with her charge nurse to please let me just stay with this one patient. She is so severely ill, she needs someone in there all the time. So she didn't have to take care of any other patients. And she sat next to my bed and just watched that ventilator continuously. And the 3 weeks ended, and I slowly came out of anesthesia. And I was taken to, I spent several days in several different rooms.
Hmm.
And in one of them, I was supposed to get up and walk with an occupational therapist. And my husband brought my tennis shoes. I I could not stand to put the sock on. It hurt so bad on my right foot. It felt like a raw burn all up and down my leg and my foot. I didn't understand that. They didn't understand it, and were not they were a little frustrated with me. Um, but another doctor that I admired at Virginia Mason, I had chosen to be my um, come and check on me kind of doctor. He was a rheumatologist, and he's the one who came in, and I told him about my right leg and my foot, and he said, "You have peripheral neuropathy." Well, I didn't even know what that meant,
Hmm.
and other than it just hurt very much.
Yeah.
So um, I I did spend some time in occupational therapy to try to desensitize that skin and those nerves. I still have nerve damage 24 years later. And at that time, I had drop foot, so I couldn't even walk because that right foot would just fall. So I had to wear a brace for about 6 months. Um, and my muscles had atrophied, so I was very weak anyway. So
Mhm.
just standing would cause me to sweat, and drops of sweat would just kind of hit the floor and go push like a
Yeah.
splatter.
Yeah.
Um, I I did have physical therapy for several months until I could move a toe, uh, and so then we knew some of the nerves were regenerating, but I still couldn't tell where my foot was in space, or whether I was pronating or supinating that foot up and down. I couldn't tell if I, and most of the time it wasn't going to do that anyway for several months. I would think about it. I'd be telling my foot to do this, but it wouldn't do that.
Right.
Eventually, the drop foot um, damage resolved itself, and I don't have drop foot anymore, but I definitely have nerve damage that feels like zinging 24/7.
Oh,
And I had no idea what caused that. I was not real happy. But I'm alive, so I'm okay now about that part. But I I learned 5 weeks after I was out of the hospital that while I was in a coma, um, the epidemiologist for Virginia Mason had called the health department, and the head of the health department had gone to my home to take samples of soil from those bags that we had purchased, and they sent those samples to an area lab as well as the CDC, and the same with sputum from my lungs, some regional lab, and then also the CDC. And it took 5 weeks to culture those samples of both the soil products and the sputum. And it came back that it was something that they had never encountered before. And the CDC had never had a report in the United States of a Legionella longibichae
Mm-hmm.
patient. So
Wow.
soil-borne Legionella bacteria. And a few years later, I learned that those bags, the lab results showed that there were multiple varieties of that bacteria in those soils, and including the Longbiche bacteria. I also found out after the fact that between April and June, I was sick in May, the
Mm-hmm.
middle of May, third week of May. There were 3 other cases of Legionella longibichae cases. So that's 4 of us, and 2 died. And an elderly lady in Oregon survived as well as I did. One of the deaths was a woman in Washington State who had been working in her yard. Her neighbor always saw her working in her yard. I think she was in her 50s. Not sure. Then she didn't come out of her house for a long time, and discovered later that she had died. And her daughter told the story that her mother had apparently called her PCP, and
Mm-hmm.
he said, "Well, congratulations, you have the flu, just stay in bed." By the time she was found, it she was deceased.
Oh,
So
it,
the
it it
other
it all happens very fast.
yes, that bacteria, once it gets into the from one warm cozy place to another,
Yeah,
it will replicate itself so quickly. The
right.
the other death was also someone who gardened.
Hmm.
So anyway,
Well, this is
I just I just didn't think about all the details for a couple decades. Just it just didn't dawn on me how close I came to death. I wasn't declared dead, but um, yeah, there you
there's
go.
yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. It clearly after 24 years has had a profound impact on your life. Um,
Yes,
do you feel like there's any, you don't have your drop foot anymore? Are there
no,
any areas in which you feel you don't have answers to? And I'm asking that because, once I was fully recovered, there was never really any further follow-up. Like, okay, this is what you could anticipate for long-term
right,
effects.
right,
This is what your new normal is going to be like. That was never
yeah,
really addressed. There's a lot of gaps in my
yeah,
story, a lot of
yes,
unanswered things. That I try not to dwell on, but that's why I'm glad we're doing these videos because I think there's probably some other Legionnaire survivors that probably I have a big hunch that, there are a lot of gaps for a lot of us. Do you feel like there's
yes.
gaps for you?
I the I think the biggest, well, there's the two. The nerve damaging in the foot, not that I ever wore stilettos, but I can't even wear pumps.
Oh,
I cannot stand pressure. Um, it would be very extremely painful for me to stand on a bath towel on the floor if it were wrinkled and I stood on that ridge of that wrinkle. It would be excruciating.
oh,
So pressure. My husband used to we'd go for walks, but he'd always want to walk toward this river, and it was a slope. I could not stand the pressure of my foot being pushed on that slope on the inside of my shoe. It was very uncomfortable.
Right.
So I'm very particular about the kind of shoes I wear. The other thing is, and people have wanted to just pass this off as my age. I was ill, had Legionnaires when I was 46. I'll be 71 in January. And the memory issues are an issue. If it's a continual repetitive thing, I can remember it.
Hmm.
But even when I worked for a few years after that, I worked for about 9 years after that. Um, once I recovered and could go back to work, but there was always memory issues,
Hmm.
and and still are. But those are the only issues really, other than the fact that I never was, no one ever ordered any PT to help me regain some strength. Nobody said, well, consider joining a gym and hiring a personal trainer. No,
Right.
nobody ever did. And that I kind of felt like that was something that they could have recommended. But
Hmm.
24 years later, oh well. Um, I did go back to the pulmonologist because somebody in the conversations that I'd had about that event with the doctor at the ICU unit there that night in those days had said that there was no blood pressure because my body had gone into septic shock. And he said that means that your vessels were enlarged and the blood could not flow to your organs, your brain, whatever. It just wasn't working.
Right.
So I had just recently looked up septic shock and discovered that when a patient has septic shock, many don't recover, but they're also the most critically ill patient in the hospital
Hmm.
because of, yeah, going sepsis and being, yeah, and your body just not functioning. So
Right.
I'm assuming that through all of that, that must have affected some part of my brain cells that affect my memory. But I feel very blessed that I have never had heart problems. I don't have lung problems. I'm hardly ever sick. And yeah, I feel very blessed that I'm
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. I think you and I both feel the same way. We were both very, very close
Yes,
to a different outcome, that's for sure.
yes,
And we're here to talk about it and share our
yes,
stories. And, I
yes,
hope it will be helpful to other Legionnaires, survivors. It's unfortunate that, there's not a lot of information out there still to this
right.
day about it. And, but this is one resource for other survivors to watch and go, oh wow, maybe one of our stories are relatable to them and can help
Yes,
in
yes.
that way. And I can't thank you enough for sharing your story with us. Is there
Thank you.
any, we'll end the interview here in just a few minutes. Is there any
Mhm.
closing statement or anything that you'd like to make?
I I would hope that in the past 24 years, more medical professionals, providers um, would not discount either the waterborne or the soil-borne Legionnaires as really the cause of a pneumonia infection. And actually, my husband did talk to the head of the ER about the fact that they sent me home 2 days, 3 days prior to me almost dying. And he was going to change the protocol there. The x ray tech at the clinic in Issaquah had told me later that administration of Virginia Mason had started using my story and those x-rays as a teaching tool with medical students.
Good.
And so there were some changes made, and that's good. But I still feel like somewhere along the line in medical school, residency, whatever, that doctors and RNs, PAs, whatever, are given a small chapter of information on these two infection types of infections,
I agree.
because if they're not handled quickly, you're going to be dead in a New York minute.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's unfortunate that uh, my family felt like um, I was very lucky to be at Virginia Mason. They saved my life. They had no idea what they were fighting against, but they did their very best, and I cannot thank them enough. Um, had I been in a small community in a rural hospital, I don't think I would be here. It would have been beyond their capabilities to
Right.
even,
They
you
may not
know,
have the resources to
yes,
handle that rare.
yes,
Yep. Yep.
yeah. So um, I think I think our what we're left with afterwards, of course, is going to be different for every patient. You probably have deficits that are different than mine, and I I just feel very fortunate that Virginia Mason did such a stellar job. Yeah,
They did. They did. I'm so glad that you were able to share your story and thank you so very much. Um,
thank you.
it was very nice to virtually meet you. We had talked
Yes,
previously on the phone, and I have no doubt
yeah.
that we're going to be phone buddies from here on out.
Oh, I agree. I agree.
All
Thank
right.
you so very much.
Yep. Thank you. Take care.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye.